And today, those of you who are familiar with AMOS know that every 2 or 3 years, AMOS groups gather to consider whether there are new issues in their local communities that we should be working on. This year we've called it the Ccc Campaign, and although that may harken back in your history books to the Citizens Conservation Corps, we are calling it Consider, Connect, and Create. Consider the past and present, connect our stories, and create more just communities. Whoops, sorry. And we get this, we are looking back in time to the time of the Great Depression and the New Deal that came in with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So we're just going to start with these quotes from him. As never before in our history, the well-being of those who have much, as well as those who have less, depends upon a contented society of goodwill, where the goodwill rests on the solid foundation that all have enough. This administration has pledged itself to the people of the United States to carry on with a wide social program pointing toward higher living standards and a more just distribution of the gains of civilization. And I'm sure that those of you watching this will agree that we have not achieved those goals yet. So here are the goals of our workshop today. Consider, we'll reflect on the era of the New Deal and how that compares with our life today. We'll connect, we'll hear stories from all of you. And then, not today, but later on, we're hoping that you will join us later this fall to organize together for more just communities. Well, why is it not advancing? I don't know why this is not advancing, Dan. I'm going to go out of...
Mary, maybe try, if you can get your cursor back on the presentation to click. Sometimes if you're in the Zoom panels.
I haven't had difficulty with this before. That's weird. Shoot. Okay, I'm going to have to stop sharing, I guess. All that I know what to do. And I can't get myself out of the full screen either. Okay. The host has stopped your sharing. All right. Now, what do we do? Let's see if we can go forward. Ah, there we go. All right. In the 1920s, as you know from history, on the 30th of October in 29, the banks failed. And because there was no federal insurance, the people who had their money in the banks saw all their life savings disappear. And these are some pictures from that time. People outside the stock exchange, people concerned about their being homeless. And in those days, 5% of the population had 33% of the income, which is, that's not as bad as it is today, as a matter of fact. So,
you want to try sharing your screen again?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was. Sorry, folks, this hadn't, we hadn't planned for this. Okay, that's the 1920s scenes with all the people out in the streets. And in the 2020s, what do we have now in terms of economic inequality? We've got almost half of Americans who can't cover $400 in an emergency without borrowing it or selling something. And that's, a simple car repair or a usual trip to the doctor practically. We have the unemployment rates you see there at the bottom in April. They're worse now. All right, here we have on the left things that were happening in the 1930s On the right, things that are happening right now. You'll see the top two sets of photographs. On the left, there are people who are looking for jobs and people who are agitating for unemployment compensation and a union wage. On the right, you've got people in front of our State House who are talking about union jobs. We've got Black Lives Matter, and we have people who are saying protect the front line, that is the health workers, and not your money. In the bottom, we have people who are going to the soup kitchen in the 1930s, and on the right, people who are standing in line at a food bank in the 20s.
Just a quick note, we can make these slides available to people who want to look at them in more detail later.
That's correct. Now, you've all heard of the New Deal again from your history books. The New Deal arose from the Great Depression. I myself didn't realize that there were 15 pieces of legislation that comprised the New Deal. And then they want us to think about the path that other countries took rather than a New Deal when they were trying to equalize the resources in communities. Germany, Japan, Italy, Russia. In Russia, there was a communist revolution. In Germany, Japan, and Italy, autocratic rulers took over and led us into war. So here's what Roosevelt was trying to do. They started out with the National Industrial Recovery Act. They wanted to put people back to work. Doesn't that sound familiar? Raise the purchasing power of labor and elevate labor standards. But notice there's nothing said there about creating unions. And that's because FDR really wasn't in favor of unions at that point. Well, in 1935, 2 years after it was put in place, the Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional. So we had to go to some other possibilities. So one of the things they did was connect public-private partnerships, which we still use today. You have on the right some of the pictures of things that were done in our central Iowa community by public-private partnerships. And the bottom picture there is the, is it the Good Doctor? I can't remember. It's the famous picture of the veterinarian holding the puppy. That was done as part of the Works, the arts project for the Works Product Administration, WPA. Also, we have some current things that are happening. Broadband connectivity, for instance, to help the rural areas have telehealth services and education and so forth. So then we are talking about the National Labor Relations Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. These took place during during Franklin Delano Roosevelt's first term, and the Fair Labor Standards Act in the second term. It provided minimum wage, maximum hours. It provided for collective bargaining. So Roosevelt must have changed his mind. Child labor was outlawed. But another thing it did was sort of entrench some of our endemic racism, because it excluded farm workers, domestic workers, independent contractors, the majority of whom were people of color. So with the National Recovery Act, one of the first things that was passed in 1933, one of the things that happened was they cleared the slums, built permanent federally funded housing, and our federal housing division of the national government dates from that time. So what they did was create long-term mortgages that were insured by the federal government, allowed many more people to own their own homes. But again, it created it locked in more of the endemic racism, I guess I would say, because the beneficiaries were white middle-class Americans because of the way that law was administered. And you'll see in the middle of that slide a map of Des Moines that shows how redlining worked. So the point of our presentation is that that was momentary democracy at the federal level. And the people who created this at the AMOS group that created this are recommending the book Fugitive Democracy by Sheldon Wolin. And as Dan mentioned, all of these slides will be available if you want to have more reading material. There are other slides that will show that we're not showing you today. So one of the other points that AMOS wants you to notice or to recall is that we get disillusioned and disengaged while we're waiting for the fleeting democratic moments at the national level. So what do we do in the meantime? How can we address this locally? And the answer is that AMOS can help create democracy at the local level. Small politics, small projects, small business, much improvisation. The small scale is the only scale commensurate with the kind and amount of power that democracy is capable of mobilizing. So let's look at what we have to be working on here. There are a couple of things on the left that have already happened. Iowa workforce development, we have, AMOS has leaned on them to put in more workers to take unemployment application requests. You can see here that there are people who are working on an assembly line in a packing plant, shoulder by shoulder. We know what that's like in the COVID-19, let alone in other times that aren't pandemic related. We have education, not incarceration. That is the over incarceration in our country. There's a Black Lives Matter. There's a person sleeping on a bench. And one thing I want to bring your attention to is the prose that's in the middle of this slide. Ames has some of the highest rental prices relative to income in the entire country. More than a third of our residents are putting more than half of their income into rent, and 28% of people in Ames live below the poverty line, according to the study that is being quoted here by Insurify. So, what are we going to do about it today? What's the next step we can take? We are going to look at the importance of our stories. Where does it hurt? As we imagine a locally focused type of New Deal for Iowa, what is a problem that you see that you'd like to change in our community? And we've mentioned a few. We've mentioned the problems with income inequality. We've mentioned the problems with, we briefly mentioned the problem of racism. We haven't even touched on issues such as mental health or the climate crisis, which we are living in the middle of. So we want you next, we're going to break up into very small groups, and we would like you each to share a personal story or experience about a problem that you see in our community and why changing that would be important to you. So let's go to our breakout rooms next. The next thing we would like you to think of, I know we had lots of good ideas in our session, and I'm sure that the rest of you did as well. The next thing we would like you to think of is the third C. Please commit to carrying out whatever of these great ideas is chosen as a whole group among AMOS to work on for the next couple of years. Please plan to attend the campaign wrap-up and delegate assembly. That's going to be Sunday, the 13th of September, 3 in the afternoon. And you can just please turn on your chat and say, I'm coming, and add your name in the chat box because we would love to know how many of our folks can join. So with that, Thank you very much for your time and your engagement, and I'm going to stop sharing.